Hello everyone, I am the Man at Kirby, and welcome to my channel, the Commander Tavern. The Commander Tavern is a channel dedicated to my favorite Magic the Gathering format. The Brewery is a series on this channel showcasing my spicy brews and other deck techs. On this episode of the Brewery, I'll be discussing my take on a commander from the Commander Masters Precons, Commodore Guff. This video is sponsored by Wizards of the Coast. But to see other cool folks who support my content, check out the description below. It'll really help out the channel. But the very best way you can help support the channel is with my Patreon. There are plenty of perks for being a patron, such as early access to certain videos, exclusive deck techs, gifts, and more. You can also support my channel for free by simply liking, subscribing, and sharing, which also helps out a lot. I put out a video every Monday, so you don't want to miss out. You can join my Discord server for free if you want to join the Commander Tavern community. All pertinent links are down in the description. Alright, let's get back to the episode. Commodore Guff is a planeswalker that can be your commander for 1 generic, 1 blue, 1 red, and 1 white. He has a triggered ability that puts a loyalty counter on another target planeswalker you control. This is a bit of a bummer since he can't put that counter on himself. However, he does already enter with 5 loyalty counters, which is okay for his casting cost. Further showcasing his Superfriends aspect is his +1 loyalty ability, creating a 1/1 red wizard creature token that can tap to add 1 red mana that can be used to cast planeswalker spells. Not only is this a chump blocker when you need it, helping Guff protect himself, but later on they can also be used to help cast your planeswalkers. His -3 loyalty ability has him draw you X cards and deal X damage to each opponent, where X is the number of planeswalkers you control. Suffice it to say that this Titan is meant to helm a Superfriends build. Speaking of Urza's Titans, lore-wise I'm also super excited for this commander since he's the 4th of them to have been printed so far, the others being Freyalise, Atraxa, and Lord Windgrace, each of them also being able to be your commander. Oh, and we also got Urza as a planeswalker. Hopefully we eventually get the rest of them. I'm super interested in seeing what they do with Taser of Rabia. But enough lore nerding. Let's get into the planeswalkers that are actually in the deck. As cool as it'd eventually be to have a deck able to run all 9 Titans in the future, for now, let's stick with the other 21 planeswalkers in the deck. Let's start off in alphabetical order, going over each one in detail. Johnny Steadfast has a +1 ability that is best used when we already have a creature. The deck doesn't have many actual creatures, but a lot of the planeswalkers do create creature tokens. In any case, +1/+1 First Strike, Vigilance, and Lifelink is quite the buff. His -2 ability is essentially a proliferate effect in the deck since he gives a loyalty counter to each other planeswalker. The +1/+1 counter to all of our creatures is a nice bonus. However, his ultimate is one of the main reasons for running him. His emblem is an amazing protective effect, reducing all damage to us or our planeswalkers to just 1 damage. This emblem is absolutely busted here. While his second ability can help boost other walkers, unless there's a better emblem to be had, try and get his in the meantime. Chandra Awakened Inferno already has an amazing static ability that prevents her from being countered, which is great because she costs 6 mana to cast. Her +2 gives each opponent an emblem that burns them for 1 during their upkeep. Doing this each turn adds up fast, so she's probably going to be targeted from the onset. Her -3 is a nice wrath effect for smaller creatures, great against token swarm decks. Just keep in mind that it will also hit your own small non-elemental creatures. Her final ability is excellent removal if she has enough loyalty counters. But with Chandra, we can definitely just spam her first ability, keeping up the second one just in case. Chandra Torch of Defiance has 4 abilities and all are great here. Her first one, Impulse, draws 1 card, but since it's cast, you lose it if it's a land. Her second ability is excellent mana acceleration. Her -3 is decent enough removal for most of the common creatures in the format. Her emblem is great and relatively easy to obtain. It's definitely helpful at killing off opponents or sniping problematic creatures. But it's not the main goal when playing her, but amazing if you do it multiple times since her emblem is stackable. Comet Stellar Pup, Legacy All-Star, believe it or not, only has 1 loyalty ability, but that's because it has a random effect. Fortunately, all modes are amazing. You just can't really choose the outcome because it's random. But you can either get 2 1/1 hasty tokens that can either be used to attack or defend, recover a card with 2 CMC or less, which is great at recovering fetch lands, it can deal damage equal to its loyalty to a creature or player, or best of all, activate its abilities twice more that turn. These outcomes can also either put or remove loyalty counters on Comet, so keep that in mind. It's 0 to activate, but the outcome will change the end result. Elspeth Knight Errant is one of the best planeswalkers in the deck. Her first ability puts a blocker to protect her, and her other +1 ability can give a significant boost to a creature. However, her ultimate is the main reason for running her, giving us an emblem that makes her artifacts, creatures, enchantments, and lands indestructible. While this doesn't protect planeswalkers, that's fine because it still makes it incredibly difficult to deal with our board. Jace Cunning Castaway is one of the more interesting planeswalkers in the deck, and we'll see why in a bit. His +1 makes it so we loot whenever 1 or more creatures we control connect in combat. However, if we don't want them to, you can just activate this post-combat. His -2 creates a blocker that unfortunately gets sacrificed if it's targeted by anything, So if you're wondering why this subpar planeswalker is here, it's because of his ultimate. He creates 2 non-legendary copies of himself. This helps in upping the planeswalker count for Commodore Guff's second ability. In fact, that was the main route I went for this deck. I originally had a shell where I tried to create as many planeswalker tokens I could via other means besides Jace's ultimate. If you're interested in me further developing that shell into a full-blown deck, let me know in the comments. Jace, Unraveler of Secrets, is leagues better as Jace Planeswalker. His +1 scries 1 and draws us a card. His -2 is decent enough removal but amazing against tokens. His ultimate provides an emblem that is absolutely busted. Arayo is banned, but his emblem is basically an Arayo that can't be interacted with beyond resetting the game with Karn's ultimate. Speaking of, Karn Liberated is in the deck. Unlike the previous Planeswalkers, we tend to not want to ultimate this Planeswalker. Not only would we lose all of our emblems, but we're essentially making the game almost twice as long. Yes, we start with what we exiled, but it's a 4-player game. Please don't ultimate Karn in your games. Just use his +4 to exile a card from my hand or his -3 to exile a permanent. Please and thank you. Jace the Mind Sculptor, another 4-ability planeswalker, is amazing here. You can either help yourself or disrupt an opponent with his -2 ability. His 0 loyalty ability is a brainstorm that we can spam each turn if we wanted to. His -1 bounces a creature to an opponent's hand, already making him better than the previous Jace. His ultimate isn't the goal of running him, but if you've got him high enough due to other effects, it can potentially end a player much faster via decking. Narset Transcendent has a +1 ability that will more often than not get that card in our hand, since 54% of the deck is a non-land, non-creature card. Her -2 ability giving Rebound is great because the deck's board wipe effects, because it essentially buys us another turn. No one is going to want to put more creatures in play if the next turn they'll just get wiped again. Her ultimate is another emblem that is incredibly taxing on opponents. They can't play any non-creature spell at all. While creatures tend to be a Superfriends deck weakness, at least the deck has plenty of ways to deal with creatures. Narset of the Ancient Way has a mana accelerative +1 ability that also gains its life. This mana can only be spent to cast a non-creature spell, but that's not really a problem here. Her -2 has an optional loot effect that, if we did discard a card, she'd deal damage to a creature or planeswalker depending on its mana value and if it's a non-creature card. Her ultimate provides us with an emblem that isn't as busted as some of the other ones we've seen. That being said, it's relatively easy to obtain with this deck, and best of all, they're stackable. The more you get of these, the more damage you deal. Narset Porter of Veils is possibly the weakest planeswalker in the deck, only because she's more like an enchantment than a planeswalker. Since she has no built-in way to get loyalty counters, she's mostly here to prevent opponents from drawing a ton of cards each turn. That being said, with all of the proliferate effects in the deck, you could realistically use her -2 ability multiple times in a game, helping you filter through the top 4 cards of your library. Rowan Kenrith might seem like an odd inclusion since her +2 ability forces each creature target player controls to attack if able. However, that doesn't necessarily mean that they have to attack us. If we have our Pillow Forts in play, they might not even be able to attack us, instead having to attack someone else. Or we can target a player without creatures or a minimal amount of creatures that we can manage. Her -2 ability seems dependent on her first one since it deals 3 damage to each tapped creature a player controls. This is great vengeance against token weenie decks, but is usually a niche ability. Her true power lies in her emblem. This emblem is perhaps the best one to obtain in the deck. This copies all of our activated abilities that aren't mana abilities, meaning that at the very least we are getting twice the loyalty ability per activation. This helps us get additional emblems from ultimating planeswalkers, and, best of all, this emblem is also stackable. Getting multiples of these means that you copy that ability each of those times. Opponents will do their best to prevent this, but if you manage to get her emblem, prepare to be the arch enemy. But wait, there is more. Her partner ability is also relevant since Will Kenrith is also in the deck. When Rowan enters the battlefield, you get to search your library for Will and put him in your hand. Likewise, when Will enters the battlefield, you get to search your library for Rowan. As for his other abilities, his +2 is great at protecting us since he turns up to 2 creatures into 0/3s. Just make sure they have no counters because that will still buff them. His -2 not only draws us 2 cards as well as reducing the cost of our instants, sorceries, and planeswalkers by 2, being way better than just a mana acceleration effect. This ability is busted here. His ultimate gives us an emblem that would be way more busted in the Spellslinger deck. This deck only has 2 spells in it that can make the most of this emblem, so suffice it to say it's not a goal to obtain it. It's a shame too because his emblem also stacks. Sarkhan the Masterless has a triggered ability that unfortunately isn't going to do much unless we're creating a ton of dragon tokens, which won't happen anytime soon because the only way of doing so is his -3 ability. That being said, creating a 4/4 flyer is something to scoff at. However, his main reason for being here is his +1 ability. It turns all of our planeswalkers into 4/4 flyers until end of turn. This gives us a way to close out games once we have a bunch of planeswalkers in play. This is one of the deck's main win cons, but not the only one we have. Tamio the Moon Sage has a protective effect with her +1 ability, freezing the worst creature on the board. Well, the worst for us anyways. Her -2 ability draws us a card for each tapped creature a player controls. Keep in mind that this can also target us, drawing a card for each tapped creature we control. This combined with Sarkhan turning all of our planeswalkers into dragons is quite glorious. Her ultimate is just another busted emblem for the deck. Not only do we get a limited hand size, but we also never really lose cards unless they're exiled. This means that any instant or sorcery that resolves or not will just go back to our hand. If we've milled those cards, they just go back to our hand. Any fetch land goes back to our hand. Anything killed or destroyed goes back to our hand. You get the point. Teferi, Hero of Dominaria, is but one of 2 Teferi cards in the deck. Don't worry, I didn't make the deck a stacks fest. That being said, since you're in the colors for it, you could definitely build a miserable stacks deck with Commodore Guff and all the best Teferi cards and stacks effects. In any case, let's analyze this Teferi. His +1 is amazing and not only drawing us a card, but freeing 2 lands at the end of our turn. His -3 tucks a non-land permanent third from the top, which is amazing against indestructible things. His ultimate provides us with another busted emblem. Whenever we draw a card, we exile a permanent an opponent controls. With all of the ways the deck is constantly drawing cards, obtaining this emblem usually has the table scoop, especially when you start exiling lands. The Teferi Temporal Archmage can help us filter the top of our library. Sometimes it's rough when they're both good, but it is what it is. His -1 ability is at least a way to untap 4 permanents that can tap for mana, and at best, a combo enabler, which we'll see in a moment. His ultimate is quite steep at 10 loyalty, but it gives us an emblem that is also one of the best ones in the deck. I know I've been saying that a lot, but this emblem is crazy in a multiplayer game. You get to activate your planeswalkers each turn. That means you can activate them 4 times a turn around the table, and at instant speed too, letting you wait until the opportune moment or at the very least at the beginning of the player's end step. Tesseract the Seeker also untaps things with his +1 ability, specifically 2 artifacts, at least a way to untap 2 mana rocks, at best, a combo enabler which I'll show in a moment. His -X ability tutors for an artifact straight to the battlefield, and that artifact is at the center of the combo, since his ultimate is barely used, if at all. So let's go over how the combo works with Teferi Temporal Archmage and the Chain Veil, the quintessential artifact in a Superfriends deck. This combo is an oldie but a goodie. You need Teferi, Tesseract, the Chain Veil, Sol Ring, preferably, and 3 other mana sources like lands or mana rocks. That part doesn't matter. Step 1 is activating the Chain Veil using Sol Ring to pay for it. This allows you to use your planeswalkers one more time that turn. Step 2 is using Tesseract to untap Sol Ring and the Chain Veil. Next, tap Sol Ring to float 2 colorless mana. Then, activate Teferi to untap Sol Ring and 3 other mana sources. Step 3 is to use the additional activation provided by the Chain Veil by using Teferi's +1 ability. That way he doesn't drop to 0 and can continue alternating between his first and second loyalty ability. Notice that we have now more mana than when we started, a Tesseract that can be activated one more time, and all of our mana sources and the Chain Veil untapped. This means that we can start this process all over again. This will inevitably provide infinite mana. The colors will depend on what we have available and how we pay to activate the Chain Veil, preferably using all available colorless mana first each time, plus drawing into our entire hand. Keep in mind that we don't need Sol Ring to draw into our entire library. We can do this combo with just 4 lands. However, the infinite mana helps us cast the things we draw into. This isn't a game-ending combo on its own, but drawing into however many cards we want helps us draw into our actual win cons and interactions. Also, all of these cards work well on their own, so just keep it in mind when you're able to assemble the combo. Continuing on, we have Tesseract Artifice Master. His +1 provides an excellent blocker. His second ability draws us a card but has the potential of drawing us 2 instead if we have Metalcraft. His ultimate gives us a nifty emblem that we can use to cheat any permanent from our library straight to play. This is amazing to get our best cards out. Well, it's pretty obvious how amazing his emblem is. Best of all, it's another stackable emblem. The last planeswalker of the deck is Venser the Sojourner. His +2 provides a delayed blink effect that might not seem useful in the deck, since there are hardly any cards with an enter the battlefield trigger. However, it can be used to reset the loyalty counters of planeswalkers that are low on loyalty. His -1 helps us aggro, although that situation barely comes up, unless you have a ton of planeswalkers and Sarkhan. His ultimate is another powerful emblem though, and reason enough to run him. Whenever we cast a spell, we exile a permanent. While not as broken as Teferi's emblem, this emblem is also stackable. This won't necessarily force opponents to scoop, but will make you the arch enemy until you're eliminated. It's only natural for the rest of the deck to synergize with us running so many planeswalkers, as well as having a planeswalker commander. Proliferate is one key mechanic, and the deck is running 8 amazing cards for it. Deep Glow Skate, Grateful Apparition, Ichormoon Gauntlet, Karn's Bastion, Lazo of Blackness' Champion, Nesting Grounds, Thrumming Bird, and Staff of Completion. Proliferation is important at helping us not only get those broken emblems, but to also keep our planeswalkers healthy. The more loyalty counters, the more damage they can take. Starting with Deep Glow Skate, earlier I mentioned Venser not having many targets for his delayed blink effect. This is one of them. Being able to double loyalty counters is already busted, but being able to do it each turn thanks to Venser is even more busted. It also works as a one-time only deal if it came to it. Plus, it's another body for blocking. Grateful Apparition and Thrumming Bird proliferate when they connect to an opponent's face. Fortunately, they both fly, so hopefully, there's an opponent without creatures able to block them. They're a bit slow in that sense, but they're cheap to cast and at the very least provide bodies to protect planeswalkers. Karn's Bastion and Nesting Grounds might also seem slow, but at least they don't take up a slot for being lands. While Nesting Grounds doesn't really proliferate, it can move a loyalty counter around at sorcery speed. This might not seem like a lot, but being just one loyalty away from getting a broken emblem makes all the difference. Ichormoon Gauntlet is probably the best of the bunch though, since it gives a 0 loyalty proliferate ability to all of your planeswalkers. If there's a particular planeswalker you want to ultimate, you can simply proliferate with the other ones and then ultimate the last one. Notwithstanding, you can also use the ultimate provided by the Gauntlet to take an extra turn. With enough planeswalkers with enough loyalty counters, it's possible to get an extra turn per turn, allowing you to win either by attaining your win cons or your opponent's scooping. Oh, if that wasn't all, whenever you cast a non-creature spell, you can put a loyalty counter on a planeswalker. Lazo of Blackness' Champion doesn't proliferate per se, but she does give planeswalkers an extra loyalty counter when they enter the battlefield, as well as the activated loyalty ability that gives them a loyalty counter, or if you proliferate them too. In and of itself, that's amazing since it requires 0 effort. No mana, no tapping, nothing. Just existing. Staff of Completion is a multi-use card in the deck, even though its main job is proliferation. At the cost of life, we can destroy something stolen, add a mana, or draw a card. Then we can pay 5 generic and untap it. Essentially, for 6 life and 5 generic, we can proliferate twice a turn, which is amazing, especially since it can be done at instant speed. Oath of Gideon and Oath of Teferi further care about planeswalkers, especially when they enter the battlefield. Gideon's Oath creates 2 blockers when it enters the battlefield, another target for Venser, and then it helps planeswalkers enter with an additional loyalty counter. Teferi's Oath has a delayed blink effect when it enters the battlefield, great at resetting planeswalkers and things like Deep Glow Skate. However, it lets you activate planeswalkers twice per turn, which is absolute madness. Rowan's Talent and Teferi's Talent are great at giving additional loyalty abilities to planeswalkers, but they also have other effects to them. Rowan's Talent lets you copy whatever loyalty ability the planeswalker does, which is amazing. Teferi's Talent has you put a loyalty counter on the planeswalker whenever you draw a card. If that weren't enough, the ability granted provides the same emblem as the previously seen Teferi. Both of these talents are great on their own, but even better since we always have a target, at least with our commander. Rings of Brighthearth is amazing if we have a lot of available mana, but nothing to do with it. Best of all, since it doesn't require tapping, we can pay for its trigger each time so long as we have the mana. Being able to copy a loyalty ability for just 2 generic each time is incredibly strong, especially with stackable emblems. Jorah the Light Captain, Jin-Gitaxias, and Whirlwind of Thought care about us casting planeswalkers and other non-creature spells, since we get to draw a card each time. Jorah might not trigger on non-legendary enchantments, nor instants and sorceries, but at least she does so on legendary creatures. It might take a bit of effort to transform Jin-Gitaxias, but once you do and get even more cards in your hand, then the second chapter bounces all non-Phyrexian creatures to their owner's hand. Keep in mind that lore counters can be proliferated, so you can realistically transform Jin-Gitaxias and then immediately proliferate as a sort of board wipe. If that weren't all, his ultimate lets you cast your entire hand for free and then returns transformed back into Jin-Gitaxias. Amazing card in Superfriends decks. Seagate's Restoration and Valakut Awakening also have the potential of drawing us a ton of cards. They only synergize with Will Kenrith's emblem, but that doesn't matter. They're generic enough to work on their own, all while also not taking up a slot in the deck for being lands when you need them, assuming you aren't greedy when playing them and play them as lands, if you need them as lands. Reliquary Tower, Thought Vessel, and Decanter of Endless Water are included due to the massive amount of card draw effects in the deck, including Planeswalker abilities. In any case, the deck not being green will have most of its mana acceleration in artifact form, although there were a couple of Planeswalkers that also help with mana acceleration. Honorworn Shaku being the best mana rock in the deck for that reason. We can tap a Planeswalker to untap it, essentially turning our Planeswalkers into mana rocks thanks to it. The deck is still running other generic mana rocks though, like Mox Amber and Arcane Signet, because not everything needs to be synergistic. Same with cards like Wayfarer's Bauble, Navigation Orb, and Burnished Heart. Land-based mana acceleration will always be best, although the heart is good at being kept up for blocks and then either sacrificing in response or at the end of the turn before ours. Speaking of lands, Interplanar Beacon and Great Hall of the Citadel are amazing color fixing options that are incredibly cheap to acquire. The former also gains its life as a bonus each time you cast a Planeswalker spell. Definitely pick these up regardless if you're on a budget or not. Now that we saw the Planeswalkers in great detail along with how to make the most of them, how do we defend them? Superfriends decks are notorious for their power and thus most creatures able to attack will almost always come for our way to hit them. Fortunately, we're in great colors for Pillar Fort effects like Archangel of Tithes, Archon of Absolution, Baird's Steward of Argive, Norn's Annex, and Sphere of Safety. Having multiples of these in play definitely helps, especially when an opponent wants to go wide but doesn't have the mana to do so. Best of all, some of these are also creatures who can block if it really came down to it. Mystic Barrier and Pramikon Sky Rampart provide effects that allow us to not be ganged up on, since only the opponent on our side can attack us. If we had both of them and chose opposite directions, then no one can attack anyone. This makes for long games, so make sure you do this only if you're going to win soon or about to get there. Silent Arbiter also helps in not being ganged up on, at least by a single player, since only one creature can attack each combat. Opponents will probably send their best and our biggest creatures our way, so good thing the deck is also running Core Haven and Maze of Ith. Not only are these lands amazing with Silent Arbiter, but they're also good on their own. Just keep in mind that Maze of Ith can't tap for mana, so do not consider it as taking up a land slot for the deck. Consider it a spell slot. Clever Concealment, Teferi's Protection, and Semester's End help us in case our defenses fail. Most of the deck's creatures are white, so it could be possible to cast Clever Concealment for free. The best thing of the two first spells is that they protect any tokens we have since they phase out. While the last one won't help tokens, it does boost whatever returns to play by granting a +1/+1 counter to creatures and an extra loyalty counter to Planeswalkers. Triumphant Reckoning helps if we do lose multiple Planeswalkers or have been relentlessly attacked as the game progressed. It does cost a whopping 9 mana to cast though, which isn't easy on a non-green deck, but this is mostly for the endgame anyway. Mistveil Plains and Mystic Sanctuary can also help with recovery, albeit via bottom decking and top decking respectively. Best of all though is that they can be fetched for with some of the deck's fetch lands. Keep in mind that there are ways to recur fresh lands in the deck, so it might actually behave more like a green deck if we have the appropriate engines in play. The deck is also running All But Be One, which synergizes amazingly with Planeswalkers. Each time a Planeswalker enters the battlefield, it deals that much damage to a creature, Planeswalker, or opponent. This is amazing at potentially killing off a future attacker whenever the Planeswalker enters the battlefield. Same with upticking Planeswalkers. It deals that much damage when that happens too, further helping you get rid of possible attackers. Blasphemous Act, Supreme Verdict, Terminus, Vanquish the Horde, Evacuation, and Overloading Cyclonic Rift do it better though by getting rid of all creatures instead. Sometimes the best defense is a good offense, and these are clear inclusions in decks that don't like creatures, just like this one. The rest of the deck is just the rest of the lands. The deck's running all 3 Shock lands, all 3 Snow Duels, Rogran Triumph, Command Tower, and Ancient Tomb, as well as 2 of each basic land to make the most of the deck's basic land ramp effects. As with all of my deck techs, you can build your mana base according to your budget. Whether you include more expensive cards or even cheaper cards is up to you. You do you. This brew is just an idea of how to build around Commodore Guff. Atraxa Praetor's voice might be the queen of Super Friends decks, but Commodore Guff is one of the top ones after her. Having access to red is stronger than you'd think, especially since you get access to All We Won, Rowan Kenrith, Sarkhan the Masterless, and the best Chandras. You also still have the same benefits of having access to white and blue. If you're interested in the deck list of the spicy brew of mine, you can find a link to it down in the description. I would like to thank all my patrons for supporting me, and a quick shout out to all my higher tier patrons, the brewers, for their patronage. I'd also like to thank Wizards of the Coast for sponsoring this video. Don't forget to check the links in the description too, that also helps out the channel. And to everyone, thanks for watching this episode of The Brewery on the Commander Tavern. I am the Mended Kirby, and happy brewing.